And this is the Chinese double braid, which is a challenging knot to do. It has a weaving element to it, and I actually happen to have a Weave It, which I got at a garage sale many years ago and paid like $2 or $3 for it. I've noticed on eBay now they're kind of expensive, so I don't recommend trying to buy one of these if you don't already have one. An alternative to, and you really do want to have a bit of either a loom or use an old pin cushion and drive some really long pins into it and create your own loom that way. You could also just use a small block of wood and finished nails to create your loom with. There's also, if you've got access to an old pot holder loom, that would help as well. But trying to do this particular knot without the loom, I would not recommend it. All right, so the biggest part about this is called a Chinese double braid, which means that you're braiding. So braiding is all about the overs and the unders. And it's really important to keep your guide next to you while you're doing this, and to make sure you've got your unders and your overs all in the right place. So your first loops on the loom are just going to be by themselves, which are these two loops here. And then when you come around for your second set of loops, you're going to make sure you need to go under for the first run for this loop, and then over all the previous strands for the second run for this loop. And again, on this part of the loop, you're going to need to make sure you go under and over. So the challenging part is following your guide and knowing where you're at in the pattern, because right now we're here because we've just completed this little loop, and we're going to come around and go back. And when we go back, each time you're doing this, you're needing to remember where you're at in the pattern, because we don't have these two loops yet. So when we come back around here, the only existing loops are this one and this one. And this shows us that we're clearly going to go underneath both and then over the top with our next loop. So we're coming around, we're going under, and it doesn't matter here at the end about the over and under, because you're looping around a peg and you're not. And the loop itself isn't going to interact with the existing cords from the prior loop when you're going around the pegs. So that part you don't have to worry about, your overs and your unders. And since we went under this round we're going to go over. And what I'm using, this cordage that I'm using right now, is I actually braided some number 10 crochet cotton, just so you would be able to see what I'm doing, because a heavier cord would have been too big for this loom, and a single strand of the number 10 cotton would have been too small. So I just braided a 6-foot long section of the crochet cotton for the demonstration for this particular project. All right, so now referring back to our pattern, so we've made this loop here, so now we're going wide, which means we're going on either side of this particular strand here. And again, the strands that we have here are this loop and this loop. So this strand is going to go under both and then over the top. So again, we're coming around and we're coming under, and I apologize for the noise from my neighbor. They're pruning bushes today. And now we're going to go over, and since it's just over, we don't have to really thread our needle through. And now we're here, and we're coming around to do this last 2 loops. And again, we're needing to remember where we're at in the pattern. And since all the other loops are done and we're doing the last 2, we can see where all the over and unders are at for these 2 remaining loops. Okay, so I'm actually going to turn this the same direction that I'm turning my piece, so I can make sure that I'm getting my overs and unders in the right position. So we're doing this line here and back again. So we're starting under, and then it's over 3, and then under, and over 3 again. Pulling our cord through, just making sure I'm coming through in the right sequence. All right, and since this needs to be inside this loop here, I'm just going to go over this peg and come back on the other side of the peg. So let me get oriented back to where my paper, my loom is at. So we're at this point right there. So we're coming back between this peg, and our pattern goes 2 under, 1 over, 3 under, 1 over, and then under. So it's a matter of following the pattern and making sure we get our overs and unders where we need to be. The reason my needle's having trouble coming through pegs is because I actually had to tie a knot for my braid, and it doesn't want to go through my weaving needle. Oh, and if you're going to do a make your own of this peg, in terms of a weaving needle, you could use a tatting needle. A tatting needle will work just fine, but what you do want is you want something long and blunt, so to help you get through the weaving portion of this project. Okay, so now that we've completed this loop, we're coming around, we've got the big loop again, and now we're doing the last of the small loops. So we're coming in here, and our pattern shows us that we're coming under 1, over 3, under 1, and then over 3. And again, since this is a small loop, I'm coming back through here. And so here on the pattern, since we're over there, we're coming under 2, we're going to go over 1, under 3, did I get lost? Where am I at? Okay, so we're coming back here, so we're under 2, so we're coming under 2, going over 1, then under 3, over 1, and under 1. Here we go. Alright, so that's the woven portion of this particular knot. Now we need to start taking out the slack to tighten things up to where we actually see the knot itself. So what I want to do is I want to actually give a bit of a tug on my cords to tighten them up where they're at right now within the loom, because I wasn't really keeping things super tight as I was weaving. So pulling out this excess slack right now is going to help me when I'm pulling the rest of the slack out. Alright, so what we want to do is on this particular knot, we're going to want nubby bits around the outer edge, and that's what these circles here on the pattern are indicating, which portion of the cord is creating our outer bumps. And so what this tells us is that all these little loops, the inner little loops, are what's going to make the center part of our knot. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to release them, that portion of the weaving from the pegs, and we're going to start pulling out the slack. And what these should do, these should be very well overlapped with each other to where our knot is going to come out correctly. So it's just a matter of getting the small loops released from the loom to start with. All right. And you can see how that pattern is starting to form up. So what we're going to do is we're just going to start giving a little tug on our big loops to help pull our weaving pattern into the center. And now we can actually pop this off, and it should keep us sorted out. And we're just going to systematically tug on our big loops to again keep pulling. Just do small amounts at a time, pulling our weave tighter to the center. Once we get our weave tight up in the center, then we can start adjusting the size of our outer loops. Okay, so there's our weaving pattern, and it'll tidy up a little bit more as we start adjusting our outer loops. So what we want to do is we want to start adjusting the outer loops by tracking back through our cords. So we know that each of the outer loops they have a corresponding small loop associated with it. And you'll want to use your needle so you know that this loop, this is our tail. We want to actually get it out of the loop right now. So it's just out of the way. Our tails are actually going to be what our knot is going to be hanging off of. So we're not going to be cutting or embedding the tails within the knot itself. So what I want to do is I want to start with this loop and incrementally work my way around. So The other end of this loop is right here with this part of the cord. So I'm going to pull it in until I have it the size I want, which is about right there. And so I pulled it there, so the next strand should pull here. Yep. And it's just remembering where you were in the weaving for the cord as to which direction it went for pulling on your cord for taking out the slack. So this particular one went this way. There it is. So it's just tracking your cord back through the knot and pulling out the slack to adjust the loop to the size that you want it. And it's just a lot of flipping back and forth and keeping track of where you're at within your loops. So we pulled this one to get there. So now there we go. We're pulling this one. Yeah, because this was a small loop. We need to make sure that we're pulling it back as a small loop and not as a big. So here we have the big outer loop, and to adjust this bigger outer loop, we have to tug on this small one. This is going to be, when we adjust the big one, this is a small loop, so we need to make sure we're keeping track of where we're at. So we're adjusting a big one by pulling on the cord for the small one. And once we get the big one down to the size that we want it, without losing track of where we're at, good, then we know that this loop that we just pulled out needs to come back in small. And so we're going to hold on to its cord to keep track of it because it's related to this big loop here. We're pulling it back through gently to where it comes up small and tight. All right, so now we're at another big loop, which we want to leave bumpy. And so its other end is coming to this small loop here. So we're going to pull it the right direction. Okay, let me backtrack as to what did I just do. All right, it's not this loop yet. We are still, so we're doing this one. We've pulled it from here to adjust that loop, and now we need to see where this end of its cord went. It went this direction. So we need to make sure that we find the correct cord end right there. So to adjust this large loop, we need to pull this cord in. There we go. And so since we adjusted a large loop by pulling a small loop, which is this one here, we need to get this pulled all the way back in. And we're backtracking a little bit. It's just a matter of working back and forth between the weaving to get the loops down to the size that you want them. Alright, I'm going to continue to pull out the slack and track where I've gone with my cord. And again, here, this is a large loop, and I'm adjusting it by pulling out the slack through a small loop. So I want to leave this one lumpy like that for now. And again, this was the small one that I used to pull out that. So now I want to pull this back in small without catching on all my other cord. Alright, so this is part of this loop here in this corner, and we want it to be large. So we're tracking where it went through on the weave. And it comes back through here. So we've just taken another small loop and we've made it big. So we know that we need to pull it back in small again when we're finished adjusting for this big loop here. So we want it to, the big loop to remain. Now we need to pull the small loop so as we're pulling our cord through, because we're taking out the slack, we're tightening up our knot. Alright, so this is a location for another large loop, but again it's going to be adjusted by pulling out a small loop on its opposite side. So I'm just trying to get a hold of the flat side of the braid. We're pulling out. You notice that how the loops keep getting a lot bigger each time as I go back and forth, and that's because of the cumulative slack. It's from the excess that was in the loop that we're adjusting, plus all the excess from all the prior loops that came before it. So that means our cord that we're pulling on is going to keep getting longer and longer as we go. And what we need to do is make sure that this particular location right here was a small loop. So I've noticed that I picked up some twist in my braid. So I'm just holding on to the braid cord to keep it together. And there we go. Now we can actually pull on our large loops again to tighten up our center. And there we have it. That came out quite lovely. This is our Chinese double braid, and this actually is, it's not an easy knot to do, but it's rewarding once you get it finished. And again, this would look nice on the either hanging down as a pendant for a necklace, and you could see where you could add beads to it as you're weaving, because the beads will be at all these points here, and where I've got the circles for noted as being the outer bumps. And I will have a picture of this on the YouTube website so you can print it out. What this does is it gives you the opportunity for adding beads as you're doing the weaving, and it'll also help once you've added beads to all these little nubby parts, that when you go to pull the slack out, you're definitely going to be able to know which loop you're on, whether you're on a large or a small loop, because all the large loops are the ones that are going to have the beads. Alright, so I hope you enjoyed this one, and please subscribe to my channel and like, and I would like to see how you you know, do this knot, and then what kind of applications you've come up with for it. And again, it would look nice with a satin cord and draping, hanging down from the back of a necklace, going down your back. That would look very pretty that way. It would look pretty as a pendant on a necklace, to where you've added beads to all the large loops. I just really like the way the Chinese knots look, and hopefully I'll be able to come back and show you some of the Japanese knots, which are beautiful as well. All right, well, thank you, and please subscribe. Bye.